Hey, campfire crew, let's get it on. Wendigo by Namaste Sexy. My husband and I were honeymooning by driving our camping rig on overlands and dirt roads from ghost town to ghost town. We'd pick a town and camp near it for the night, and we'd been doing that for about a week. Nothing special or creepy happened at any point, just some nature and some history. One town I was very excited about was Garnett, Montana. It's just about an hour from Missoula, and we'd called our friend who's an outfitter in Billings for a place to camp. He said just up the mountain there are flat spots. Now, we had a 17-year-old Tahoe with big tires, a rooftop tent, and sleeping quarters in the cabin because we always travel with our 2 dogs and cat. So all we really need is a decent spot, slightly hidden, and we're good. As we drove up the back side of the mountain off the main road, I saw abandoned cars and a few rundown houses. Nothing too weird, but I couldn't shake the pit in my stomach that was growing. We got further up and past the parking area for the ghost town, and the higher we drove, the more my instinctive anxiety kicked in. You know, the flight of fight or flight. Adding to it, my dogs were going nuts. Of course, I wrote it off as them just needing to go out. We finally found a flat spot, and I realized my husband and I hadn't spoken the whole drive up, probably 45 minutes. He went to get out of the car to see if it was level, and I grabbed his hands. The dogs were barking and whining and pacing. I said, "Please don't turn the lights off." I think I saw eyes before we stopped. He just looked at me confused and asked why he had to, but he did leave the cabin lights on. When he got out, all I could think about was how something was watching. I didn't even know what it was, but I sensed it followed us from where the eyes had flashed. When he got back in, I told him to not let the dogs out yet, and he just said, "We should just go. Something's not right." We camp a lot, and I get spooked, but my husband never does. We usually hang out, and I relax, and it's fine. He's never left a spot because I've been alarmed, so when he said we should go, I knew he felt something too. We headed down a different road, a paved one to I-90, driving very fast. I looked in the rearview mirror, but the dogs were in the way, and the tent was so dark you couldn't see well at night. But there was a rumble out there, like something big was running. The tension was growing, the dogs were pacing, and he and I were bickering, and it started snowing hard out of nowhere. We came around a turn, and a stark white rabbit dashed in front of the car, and we hit it. A hush fell over all of us after that until we got down the mountain onto a side road, and all the anxiety we felt was gone when we got there. Cut to the other side of Missoula where we camped. Zero creepiness. That is, until the next day. As we were driving back to Garnett on the main mountain road we came out on, we noticed a point when we ascended the mountain that we both started feeling nervous. I looked at my husband after we made the big turn and said, "Hey, where's the rabbit?" It was gone. No carcass, no blood, no animal tracks, no trace of it having ever been there. I can believe that something got it, but no trace? I mean, we were the first people up there, no other tire tracks besides ours on the way down. And I would think you'd see blood or something. But it was just gone. The snow wasn't deep enough to have buried it because we could still see our tracks from the previous night. Just no rabbit. So we got to the ghost town, which is very interesting, by the way. And we were talking to the rangers about the creepiness on the mountain, and one of the guys said, "Yeah, there's something up here. I wouldn't stay by myself at night." And the other smiled and said, "What exactly did you see and feel?" So I told him I felt fear. I mean, a deep primal fear that it was old, not human, hadn't been human for a while, if ever. I said it wasn't a ghost and it wasn't a living crazy person. I just felt like it wanted to eat me, which I know is strange, but I felt like we were being hunted. And, I said, at one point, I thought I saw its red eyes, but I couldn't be sure. but I did think it followed us from where I saw the eyes, kind of like stalking us. He looked at me and said, "There's a Wendigo up here. You know what that is?" I didn't, but when he described the lore, I almost cried. What he described was it exactly, right down to the eyes. A few months later, I was telling the story to my stepmother, who had been researching American Indian symbolism, and she said, "You know what rabbits are, right?" Of course I didn't. Rabbits are often believed to be warrior spirits, and they say that when the rabbit comes, he's fighting for you. That rabbit sacrificed himself for you guys that night. A chill ran over me, and my husband looked at me and said, "You know, after we saw the rabbit, whatever it was, stopped chasing us." Pretty sure we saw Bigfoot by Anonymous. My son and I were out camping, and we arrived at the horse corral near Groundhog Meadow late on a Friday night in early of September 1978. We spent all Saturday building 2 deer blinds with the intent on coming back to the area to hunt later that year. The area at that time didn't receive very much recreational activity, and we saw no one else while we were camping. Saturday night, though, 3 strange incidents occurred. First, early in the evening, my son and I heard 2 screams. The first scream was located near the horse corral. The scream sounded like it was from something very large. It was very loud and low-pitched, sort of like a very large, angry man. I've heard mountain lions in the past since I've hunted all my life, but this was nothing like that. A few minutes later, we heard another scream, just like the first, but it came from the east, like from the emigrant wilderness. We both acknowledged that we had heard the screams, but neither of us knew what it was. My son checked the horse corral, and he didn't see anything. But later that evening, as we were sitting around the campfire, I noticed a pair of red eyes looking at me from near the horse corral. The area where the eyes was in total darkness, and I don't know if the firelight could reach that far in order to cause the eyes to reflect red. At first I just thought it was a deer or other animal, but then it dawned on me that the eyes were at least 6 to 7 feet off the ground. Since I knew the area very well, I knew that there were no trees or other objects in the area for something like an owl or whatever to stand on. After watching it for about 30 minutes, I asked my son if he also saw it, and he did. He and I continued to be watched for another 30 minutes, for an hour total. But then after I briefly looked away and turned back, the eyes were gone. The next morning, both my son and I checked around the area and confirmed that no trees or other objects were present for an animal to stand on and appear to be 7 feet tall. The last incident happened the same night when we went to my camper to eat dinner and go to bed. The camper was on the bed of my utility truck and was at least 5 feet off the ground. As we were making sandwiches, we both heard and felt a loud bang or thud on the side of the camper, on the front driver's side. The camper was hit so hard it shook the entire truck, and we grabbed our flashlights and immediately went outside, expecting to see either a tree limb or a very dazed deer. We saw nothing. We even circled the camper and didn't see anything. Then we both realized that whatever had hit the camper had to have been at least 6 feet tall and could not have been a deer running blindly in the dark. We thought that all the incidents were strange, but nothing else happened that night, and we just went home the next day. We returned to the area to hunt later on that year, and that time we saw or heard nothing. I'm thankful for that. Skinwalker by Anonymous. I was spending a month with my cousins at my grandma's house. It was August, and my cousins' ages ranged from 10 to 15, and I was the oldest, being 15. I was staying with a 10, 13, and 14-year-old. We stayed up telling scary stories often, but one night a few weeks in, we decided to make a campfire out back. My grandma's house is in a rural suburb. The neighbors aren't too far when you're driving down the road to her house, but in the backyard it's thick forest with man-made paths through it. Each house is on a hill, so part of the basement was actually underground. That's not important until later. So we were towards the east side of her yard, in a patch of open land. You couldn't see the neighboring yards from there, and there was probably 3/4 of a mile to each side of us that belonged to my grandma. It was maybe around 11 at night, and we were playing Truth or Dare after telling scary stories. And my 14-year-old cousin dared me and the 13-year-old to go walk through the paths for 10 minutes or so. I said yes right away, as I wasn't easily scared and rather level-headed. But my younger cousin was a little bit more hesitant. We didn't bring a flashlight because it wasn't pitch dark yet, and we could see enough to not die. We were walking through the paths for about 5 minutes and could barely see the fire through the trees when we decided to turn around. In the middle of the path was a large dog-like creature, hunched over with its front hands an inch from the ground. What I remember most was how its eyes were so fucking bright white, and it was humanoid dog-shaped with a human-like head, but a dog-like body, but human hands and feet. It looked right at us, and I knew I was paralyzed with fear as it dashed away the opposite way from us, towards a creek that ran through the yard. Eventually, my cousin and I screamed bloody fucking murder, and the other cousins and my grandmother ran to us. I don't remember much here because I was really disoriented and I couldn't think properly. But I did wake up in bed, so I assumed that I was brought up to the house. All the kids slept in the basement in a big room with sliding glass doors to the outside, as the room was on the side that wasn't underground. My bed was pressed against a big glass window, and I could see my cousins playing outside down below. The house is in Michigan, so it gets slightly chilly even in the end of August, and there was a slight breeze, so I put on a jacket and ran outside to join them, skipping breakfast, not wanting to miss out on anything fun. When I got down, I could tell they weren't playing at all, but rather running to get my grandma. Her dogs, both of them, were dead, ripped up. That night we went to bed early, and I woke up at maybe 2 a.m. because I felt like something hit my head. My cousins were all sitting on the double bed opposite me on the other side of the room. There was 1 bunk bed and 2 double beds, the double beds for me and my 14-year-old cousin. They were being quiet and staring at me. The 13-year-old nodded his head toward the window. I froze. They all looked so afraid. I turned my head slightly to the side, and I saw a really messed up looking face pressed to the window with gaping eyes looking down at me. I screamed so fucking loud, and the thing bolted. My grandma called the police after I told her what had happened, but they found nothing. I went home after that, and have never been out there during the night again. Short but scary, submitted by Jonathan V. Back in the mid to late 80s, I can't remember the year exactly, my family went to visit some friends of the family who lived outside of Coudersport, Pennsylvania. It was a boring drive there, but we knew it was going to be fun because they lived on a farm. Not a huge farm, but they had a couple of cows and some other animals. I guess it was more of a hobby than anything else. When we got there, we had fun learning about the animals and checking them out and everything. But my friend Tom, who was my age, said, hey, we should climb the mountain behind his house. I thought that was really cool because where we lived was nothing but flat. Flat everywhere. To be in the mountains was kind of neat. So my little brother Josh, his little brother Keith, and I all went up following Tom as he knew the best way up there. It was pretty hard going, as the mountain got steeper as we went. And when we got to the top, we thought, hey, maybe we can camp out here tonight. At this point, I should point out that Tom and I were the oldest, and we were only about 14 at the time. We got super stoked to do it, and not even asking our parents for permission, we just started preparing a campsite. Then we made our way back down to the house and to ask if we could actually go back up there, and our parents reluctantly said yes. It was late spring, so pretty warm during the day, but it would get very cold at night. So Tom's father rummaged around for some extra sleeping bags, and we got all of our gear together and figured we'd also pull some on a sled behind us with some rope. Back we trudged up the hill, with our dad saying that they were going to check on us later before we went to sleep. Man, you could get away with so much more in parenting back in the 80s than you could now. We had brought along some sandwiches that our moms had made us and some other snacks for later that night, including some marshmallows to roast over a fire. We made the arduous journey back up the mountain, got to our campsite, and set up 2 pup tents quickly. We then made a fire pit and got a fire going, even though it was only about 6 in the evening. With all of the trees around us, it got dark pretty quick, and we wanted to make sure that we had a fire going with plenty of firewood around us so we wouldn't have to go looking for that in the night. We were laughing and having a good time and just drinking soda and being guys. At around 8:30, we heard something walking towards us and we all stopped, totally forgetting that our dad said they were going to come and check on us. Into the firelight they came and commented on how well we had set up camp and then hung out with us for a little bit. My dad at first was saying, hey, maybe this isn't such a good idea, but he was shouted down and we all ended up staying. We stayed up pretty late, roasting marshmallows, telling scary stories, and all that kind of thing. Well, we decided it was probably time to hit the hay. We figured we'd burn a couple more logs and then go into our tents. And while we were doing that, Keith said, "You guys see that?" We all looked at him like, what? What are you talking about? And he pointed off into the distance, which was nothing but blackness. I kept looking and said, what are you talking about? I don't see anything. But then my little brother Josh said, yeah. What is that? Is that a bear? Tom and I strained to see what the heck they were looking at, and after a few seconds, our eyes adjusted, and we saw it too. And while there are lots of bears out there, this was not a bear. We sat looking at it, trying to figure out what it was in the darkness. All we could see were 2 piercing yellow eyes, maybe 6 feet off the ground. But there was something strange about them. They kept like bobbing up and down. And that's when we realized it was moving towards us. I looked at Tom and said, could that be an owl? Maybe it's hurt or something and it's just kind of flying erratically? Tom shook his head and said, I've never seen an owl do anything like that. And as this thing got closer, its shape began to take more form. In the faint outlines of the fire, we finally got a glimpse of this thing. And to this day, I am telling you the truth. It was about 6 feet tall, but its arms hung way far down its body. It sort of looked like a man, but its head was compacted onto its chest like it had no neck at all. Its long arms drooped down past its knees, and its knees were bent at a funny angle, kind of like the back of a goat. Years later, I would joke after seeing this terrible movie called Manos, the Hands of Fate, don't even bother watching it, it's terrible. But the bad special effects they had of a guy who was dressed up to look like a goat was what this thing kind of looked like from the waist down. For whatever reason, we didn't run just terrified into the night. We all stood transfixed looking at this thing. No one said a word, and it didn't make any noise as it kind of got closer and closer to us. Finally, it was on the edge of the actual bright light of the fire, and it stood up. I can't tell you how terrified we were, but we were all rooted to the ground in shock and fright. This thing had yellow skin and the brighter yellow eyes, and again, its head seemed to be embedded almost to its chest. It opened up a strange-looking mouth with only a couple of teeth in it, and then it raised one of its really long arms and pointed over our shoulders, back down the hill. Again, for no strange reason, we didn't freak out and just tear out of there. Tom said, I think we should just pack up and go. This thing stared at us for another 10 or 15 seconds, and then slowly walked back into the darkness, its back to us this time, not making a sound, just going and fading away. We all looked at each other and said, I think we really ought to go. We knew it would be dangerous going back down the hill at night. We knew we were going to get yelled at by our parents, but there was no way we were staying up there. So, before we put out the fire, we packed up all of our stuff, got out our flashlights, and then made our way back down the hill once we secured the camp and knew that the fire was out for good. We made our way down the hill, slipping and sliding half the way, by this point pretty scared and trying to make as fast time as possible. It was a little before midnight when we hit the back porch, and our parents were still up talking or doing whatever his parents do. And yes, they were very angry that we had come down the hill without them knowing. But they just immediately sent us to bed without asking what the heck had happened up there, only that we could tell they were pretty pissed off. The next morning when we woke up, it was a Sunday, and my family was going to be heading back home later that day. We told them what we had seen, and everyone looked at us like, yeah, sure, that's what happened. Our fathers winked at each other, knowing, yeah, bunch of scared kids in the woods, they can't handle it. Maybe it was a mistake to let them go up there. All I know is that we saw what we saw. Unfortunately, Keith is no longer with us. He passed away a few years ago, very, very young for his age. I lost touch with Tom. I have no idea where he lives now. And I should ask my mom because I know he's still friends with his mom. Of course, I'm in contact with my little brother Josh, and we do talk about it from time to time. Because it's been so long, it does seem more like a crazy legend that's passed down from generation to scare kids from going into the woods. But we know what we saw. Whatever that thing is, I've never heard anyone tell any kind of story like the one we have. I've never heard about any other legends that involve something like that. There is some legend called High Hat, and maybe that's what it was, but it certainly didn't have a high hat. Its head was scrunched so low. Either way, for all I know, that weird creature is still out there, wandering around in the mountains outside of Coudersport, Pennsylvania. Hey gang, thanks for listening to this episode of Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories. If you have a true scary story of any nature that you'd like to hear narrated on my podcast or channel, email it to unclejoshtruescarystories@gmail.com. I read them all. If you haven't already, please like, share, and subscribe to my channel. Follow me on social media. All of the links to that are in the description below. And if you'd like to take it a step further in your support, find me on Patreon. Everyone, be excellent to each other. And until next time, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.